Okay, what did everybody think about the finale? I actually really liked it. I thought it was really, really well put together. Granted, we obviously didn't see Beth, and I know that people are disappointed about that, but we'd pretty much gotten that by the time that this aired. Um, and I'm already getting a lot of questions about what the reviewer meant when she said TD would get a lot out of this episode. I honestly don't know what she meant. It's strange. It is. And I was trying to articulate it a little bit in one of the last videos I made. I wonder if it's just because they shut the door so firmly on Carol. And I know that doesn't make sense to any of us. But I'm thinking that other shippers, in their minds, they're thinking, oh, well, if they firmly shut the door on any other ship, then we would like it. And so they're thinking that we will like this season because they shut the door on the idea of Carol being a romantic thing. Um, and that, I think they don't understand that that's really not going to do it for us. I mean, of course, we're glad that they are. I mean, because to us, this wasn't the first time that they ever shut the door on that. They've been shutting the door on that since like season 3 of the flagship show in various ways. It was just more subtle in the past. And so, of course, we're glad that they're being more overt about it and more obvious about it. But that's also not what we're really looking for here. That's old news to us. So we're looking for an actual sign of Beth. So I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of. And then she also said something about how it doesn't say that Beth wasn't his true love. And again, like that's like, okay, but we also knew that they wouldn't say that. So it's just, anyway, I don't even know that she was trolling us, maybe, but I honestly think that it's just a difference in how people think. Anyway, and my argument would be that we actually got a lot of indications of Beth this season, like tons of them that were really strong. Granted, nothing obvious. We didn't see her, we didn't hear her, nothing that anyone other than Team Delusional is going to pick up. But I was still very happy, very pleased with this season. And here in the final episode, we have some more stuff. I probably will not have quite as much to say about this episode as the last two, but um, we're still getting some pretty strong indications here. And it just makes sense, as I said before, that, if this is a two-season arc and Carol found romance in the first part, that Daryl would find romance in the second part. So I'm just looking to season 4 still, right? So let's jump into what the episode actually says, all right? So we start with the statue that Daryl passed a few times. And we see this person walking up, and I probably should have realized right away that it was Codron because we knew that we were going to see him, but I didn't realize it right away that it would be him. Not until he actually walked up and I was thinking, okay, who is this? And then I went, oh, yeah, of course it's Codron. Okay. But the thing that really jumps out at me about this, and this is actually one of the biggest things from this episode for me, is that if you think about the season 5 template, here, Codron is Morgan. He is a pilgrim who's walking around by himself, following a path, obviously looking for something. Um, he comes to the statue. Remember that in Coda, Morgan, kind of created his own little altar and prayed to it. Here, Codron crosses himself at the statue. So there's a religious acknowledgement going on. And then, of course, he recognizes the Rubik's Cube, which is Laurent's, and that tells him that somebody he knows, meaning Daryl, is around in the area somewhere. And with Morgan, he found the map that had Rick's name on it, said Rick Grimes on it, so he knew Rick was in the area. You see how those line up? Now, chronologically, I'm not going to try to be too specific about it because, with Morgan, that was in Coda, the end of Coda, that he found the church and created the altar and everything, and that was after Beth was shot. But they could be going in reverse order, and I don't think really the chronology of it matters that much. The point is that it's lining up in an interesting way. So I thought that was super interesting, and I like the idea of Codron being the pilgrim that's eventually going to meet up with Daryl again. Um, I won't go into this too much. Me and my fellow theorists were talking about possibilities for how Codron was going to intersect with Daryl and Carol's story again. And at some point, I want to say it was last season, season 2, I remember discussing that he might have been kind of a parallel to Noah at Grady, but I don't remember why or how he was a parallel. I don't remember what we were discussing. So I'm going to have to go back and see if I can find what our discussion was about. And I don't know if that's true. I don't think it was something we saw and we're like, absolutely, he's a Noah parallel, but it was just something that we considered he might be, rather. And if that's the case, in some way, shape, or form, I can see him being the person who alerts Daryl that Beth is around somewhere, in some way. So we're kind of looking at that as a possibility. So this was just interesting in the way that he lined up with Morgan. And WDWA also pointed out, I don't have it in this shot. Actually, it might be in the previous one. Let me check again. Yeah, he's right next to the PPP, which does suggest symbolically that he is associated with it some way. Um, Anytime that somebody's in the shot with something like that, it usually does suggest that their arc in some way has something to do with that symbol. So it kind of makes sense, right? If he knows something, if PPP is tied to whatever organization that Beth might be a part of, and Codron is tied to that somehow, it makes sense that maybe he is going to be around, um, and maybe lead Daryl to Beth in some way. We don't know. This is all conjecture, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And then, of course, we have the fact that he is the serious character. He's only got one eye. Um, and I'm excited to see Kodron again. I actually really liked him as a character. Obviously, we're not going to really see much of him until next season, but this was interesting, and it was the first thing we saw. So even though it wasn't a coda, it was almost like a little prequel, because he's much like Morgan did in season 5, he's actually outside the main story, wandering around, right? But we're not actually getting like a character arc with him. So very interesting. All right, so then we get more into the story. Carol brings Roberto to the lighthouse, and just as she thought, Valentina welcomes them in. I couldn't capture this in a screenshot, but this is where they did you do something fancy schmancy with the lens so that it looks like the clouds are moving really fast. Obviously, I'm not a photographer and I don't know the lingo, but anyway, I really liked that. I thought that was cool. But Carol's worried about Antonio and obviously wants to go back and get him because he never showed up at the lighthouse. And sure enough, we do see that Fede is torturing him. Now, I do want to point out Gustavo, I think is his name. This guy, he's the gate guy that I kind of compare to Jerry a little bit. He actually tries to help Antonio here, but Sergio, points the finger at him and says, "Stay back." He won't let him help him. Antonio saying that as long as his son is safe, that's all that matters. But Fede really wants to know what Daryl's up to. Fede, again, he's really paranoid about the whole alliance with El Alcazar. So he's worried about what Daryl's doing, but of course, Antonio won't tell him. So then we get Daryl and Paz arriving at where they need to be. Did you catch that they put all their weapons in the trunk? I thought that was interesting. And presumably it's just so that they don't get stolen while they're gone. But that was a purposeful choice to show them opening the trunk, putting all of their weapons in, mostly bullets and guns is what they put in there, and then shutting the trunk. So I thought that was an interesting symbol. Um, she starts to tell him a little bit about how she was left for dead in the road, which again, interesting symbol right there, interesting parallel to some of what we've seen. But obviously she survived. We do get an Isabel mention here, not by name, but he says, she says because they left her to die in the road, she gave up hope. He says he had a friend who used to say, bet on hope. He says French people, they talk like that. Um, and then she says, I didn't come all this way just to give up again. So we've got some, obviously this parallels Daryl as well. Um, and I think that it's more than just here. Obviously, like her, Daryl's not going to give up until he gets Justina back and takes her, back to Roberto. But I also think that this is a foreshadow that, when Daryl does stumble across his soulmate, he's obviously not going to give up again at that point. He's going to figure it out, right? So just as Paz once lost Elena, and she did give up at one point, and I do think that's what happened, or at least how Daryl feels about what happened in season 5 with him and Beth, that he gave up too early. Once he knows she's alive again, he's not going to give up no matter what. And just as Paz was able to get Elena this time and find some happiness with her, so will he. So it's just a great big foreshadow here. Um, Roberto is obviously still very bitter toward his father, and Carol's trying to, you know, calm him down a little bit, and he's not really having much of it. And so this is kind of interesting. She says, you're too young to remember the old world, but for some of us, it just got easier to stop thinking about the future, easier to stop believing that we could ever be happy. And this is obviously true of her. It's also true of Daryl, for sure. So this is kind of an interesting conversation. And then she says, I'm going to go back and get your dad. So then we see Elena, or I mean, not Elena, Justina being prepped for the ceremony and everything. Definitely, we were all right that Elena is in trouble at this point because Guillermo saw her looking at Paz, and he is not happy about that. And here he just seems angry. He doesn't actually do anything, but even so, it escalates throughout the episode, right? And then we see these girls. And now we've heard of actually about this before from the people, uh, Leia, I think was her name, the people at the camp who rescue the girls from who were part of the Ofrendas, and she talked about the girl who was the Beth proxy, who was playing the guitar. Her name was Sandra, and she said that she was not chosen and therefore was put to doing manual labor, but they beat on her a lot. She went through a lot at their hands and was eventually able to escape. Okay, these are some of those same girls that were not chosen and now they just do manual labor. And in a lot of ways, that would almost seem preferable because at least they're not being forced, into any kind of sex slavery or anything. But it's clear that they do deal with a lot of abuse. And I mean, they're basically Cinderellas who have to scrub the floor and get kicked for it, right? So it's not a happy existence. But we see some of these girls who have suffered that same fate as Sandra did. And one of them even has a scar here. And it was this scar that really got me thinking about this. Um, I'll go into it maybe a little bit more later. I can't remember if there's something else that's more relevant, but I'm actually wondering if something like this will happen with Beth. It obviously won't be the same thing, but something similar where, she's taken and just because of the whole Justina parallel is so strong that there's something like this going on. Like she's offered up and meant to be chosen for something similar to this. And then she isn't because Beth specifically does have scars all over her face. So for really shallow, not so great people like this, looks are everything. And so I'm assuming this woman was not picked because of that scar, which is really shitty of them. But again, these are very shallow people who are, really into looks. And so, of course, she wouldn't be. And they would probably feel the same way about Beth. So I'm wondering if she's somebody who doesn't get picked and is set to manual labor. And then we have Sandra, who eventually got away. And I feel like that's such a strong Beth parallel here. And then they put these two in here as part of the story, a minor part of the story, but still. And one of them has a scar, which is very similar to Beth. So it's interesting, the things that they put in, these little hints they put in. And anyway, it just got me thinking about that a bit. So I keep calling her Elena. I'm sorry. Justina begs Elena to help her, but Elena says, we're not children anymore. I never should have gone back to Solas. I think Elena is getting cold feet here a little bit, even though she told Paz, that she wanted to maybe try to see her again. But especially in the face of Guillermo's anger, I think she's really backing off because she's afraid. When he starts talking to her, I mean, he doesn't scream, he doesn't raise his voice, we don't see him hit her at all, but she immediately puts her eyes down. So you can tell he's controlling and that she is afraid of him. Um, and then they actually see these girls being kicked and being hit. And she says, if you want to be chosen, because if you're not, you're going to end up like them. And it's actually worse. So then these guys show up at Solas. These are Valentina's guys, and they say they have some supplies that they want to bring in and to go to the store. So Gustavo lets them in, but of course Carol's hiding in the back of the truck, coming in the way they took Roberta out. Daryl and Paz get the masks, and she says it so they don't have to look the workers in the face. So we have that class system thing going on again, which we've seen before. But they do put them on and start working. So then Donna Marga, she confronts Fede about whether he sent Justina away. And of course he denies it. And he says, why would you believe your own son over a stranger? And that actually does convince her. And she says, okay, well, I knew it couldn't be true, but the people need you to tell them that. They have questions, you need to answer them. So he does address the people, and he shows them the men that Daryl killed, which were Guillermo's men, right? To convince them that the Americans were evil and all of that. And then they decide that they are going to execute Antonio. And so they put him in this little contraption that we've seen before. So then we get to the walkers that are marionettes. Now, I did not take pictures of all of this, but I went back and watched it again. And I encourage you to watch it again because I think the interactions between the walkers are actually significant and they're using them to foreshadow things. It is very quick. So it's not like they spend a lot of time on it, but they do specifically show it to us in the camera shots. Okay. So these are the four that you want to be most concerned with. This is the king. This is the queen. This looks like a court jester, and this is a churchman of some kind, like a priest almost. Think Princess Bride, right? The priest was dressed like this, with the tall hat and everything. So first we have the king and queen that kind of struggle together, and then we get the jester whispering to the queen and the churchman whispering to the king. And then the queen uses her scepter here and smacks the king in the face, and that's when he falls down like face plants on his stomach. And then we see the crown being put on the queen's head. So it's like the queen won. Um, Now, this is, I wasn't sure if they were going to use this in some way as a foreshadow for what was going to happen in this episode, but they actually didn't. We'll get to this in a minute, but the king and queen of Spain were both killed here, and then Guillermo was also killed. So there there's literally no one to take the throne now, at least in this organization at the time. So the question is, what does all this mean? And I could go probably for a while on this, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly. The way that the King Walker falls on his face actually mirrors exactly the way that Beth falls on her face when she and Noah are trying to escape Grady. So it could be a callback to that and some sort of hint about what was going on there, in the sense that two people were struggling, and when one of them went down, the other one won. And I don't know exactly what that would be with Beth. She would be the one who fell on her face and went down, right? But because we don't know what was all going on at Grady, how there were ties to outside organizations, the missing 17 days, it's really hard to say exactly what this correlates to. But the other thing it made me think of is, and this is something that I will probably do a video on it eventually, but again, haven't gotten around to all of the extras while the season's been on. But we were talking, me and my fellow theorists, and specifically Gladriel Jones had a lot of theories about this, and that is the chess pieces, the chessboard. And I have done metas on this before, but it's been a long time. When we saw obvious chess symbols actually started back in season 4 around the governor. Remember, he had that chess piece that Megan colored a little eye patch on to have it like be like him. So we saw that, and we've seen it a few other times. We saw it in Dwight's quarters when Daryl was trying to escape from the Saviors. So we've seen it a few times, but we do think that they use it as kind of a template, and it's almost like the writer saying to us that Gimple is playing chess here. He's getting all of his pieces in the right spots, so that he can, um, go in for the kill, that sort of thing. And the reason that this reminded me of that is because the queen did win, and in chess, it's the queen that has more power rather than the king. So again, I'm not 100% sure what they're pointing at here, but they did go out of their way to show us just a little bit of a story that they're telling with these marionette walkers of the king, being overcome by the queen, and then we actually see the crown being put on her head. And then these are obviously two factions that are like whispering in their ears. Um, and like I said, I could go for a long time on this. I mean, the fact that there's a churchman, religion is part of it. The gesture, though, is very Shakespearean and often represents conscience or a wise man. So, I mean, there's so many different ways you could go with it, but I thought it was really interesting what they did with these walkers on the stage. So this is the King and Queen of Spain. Oh, this is the crown being put. This was lowered. The crown was lowered down onto the queen's head here. And then they lift her up and everyone else seems to bow to her. Then the king gives a speech, and this little 3-second clip, did leak. And I just thought this was actually the most interesting line. The flame of human consciousness, he says it needs to be preserved. And that just feels like, almost like an experimentation thing, that they're trying to preserve humanity. And, they say, or back when a friend has started, they said that it was to repopulate the planet or something. I mean, and I think that's the biggest, other than just people who are dangerous because they're trying to survive and they're scared out of their minds and so they're lashing out and become violent. When something like this happens, like the apocalypse, I mean, that's going to be your number one danger is people who are so dangerous because they're just so scared, you know. But then eventually those people will die off, and then the next biggest threat is going to be people who feel like they need to save the planet single-handedly and are going to do it by forced repopulation or forced, you know, whatever it is, slavery, taking people as test subjects. I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities, and they're all threats because they're all done really unethically. And we've seen at least hints of most of those in The Walking Dead by now. So this just feels like more of that. Um, must keep burning. So the flame of consciousness must keep burning. That's what he said. And of course, there's that fire theme in there. Daryl's just looking around. Then they play a record, always a Beth symbol. And then he sees Justina come out with the other girls and be. Oh, I remember now why I was going to talk about this later. Okay. So interestingly, they're all wearing different colored dresses and they each have a flower that corresponds to the color of their dress. I thought it was interesting the way they did that. So it's a little hard to tell because the lighting isn't great, but I believe it's yellow, Justina's in white, pink, blue, and green. So when someone comes and picks them, they take the color flower that corresponds to the dress of the girl they want when one of the men do it. And the king is giving this, you know, eloquent speech about how it's not just a ritual, it's a promise we make to the future, yada, yada. This guy comes up, he's obviously going to choose. And now we get Guillermo escalating a little bit. This must be hard for you. Maybe I need to remind you what's your place. I mean, it's like the more he thinks about it, the more angry he's getting. And you're getting more and more worried about Elena, right? Now, this is super interesting, actually. I think what Justina does here. I don't think he was actually going to pick her. And she realizes that. So she takes her hair down and just like meets his eyes. And of course, that intrigues him. So he picks her. And she smiles at him as though she's only too happy to go with him. Um, and then he says, "Do you want to sit if it pleases you?" So she's just playing the doting bride, right? Now, these two were not picked. So the obviously Justina in white and then the blue and the green were both picked. The ones that were not picked are wearing pink and yellow. That better jump out to you as Beth colors and even music box colors, right? These two were not picked. And this is more of why I'm thinking that something like this will happen with Beth. Remember, I was saying because of the scars, because the girl who, Sandra, who was playing the guitar, was also not picked. I'm feeling like this is very Beth coded. Justina does grab a knife and put it up her sleeve, which is also a Beth move, you know, from season 2. Then we go back to Carol. She gets Antonio down, but they're caught. They're not able to get away cleanly, and people start firing at them. Daryl goes up on the stage meanwhile. And I did think this was kind of funny. It's one of those things that's probably not supposed to be funny, but this guy yells at him. He's going, "Are you lost? Or are you just stupid?" And Daryl headbutts him. And I don't think Daryl understood what he was saying because dude's speaking Spanish. You know, Daryl doesn't really speak much Spanish. But I was going, okay, number one, kind of embarrassing for that guy to get headbutted by someone wearing a porcelain mask. And number two, how did Daryl do that without breaking the mask? He just headbutts that guy and it just made me laugh. I was like, all right, well, very Daryl, you know, classic Daryl. I'm here for it. Obviously, he lets the walkers go and they all come out from the stage. And both the king and queen end up being, so here's the queen. I think I got this is the king, but you kind of can't see him because the jester's in the way. So both of them get taken down. And basically, everybody's running and screaming, typical stuff. And Daryl throws a lantern, which starts a fire. So then we've got Carol and Antonio hiding. And notice how these two things are being paralleled. In both cases, we have, even though Daryl and Justina are not a romantic couple, at the same time, she represents Beth and he's trying to get her for Roberto. So it kind of works, you know. But we've got the, you know, quote unquote romantic couples running around trying to escape in both cases. Alba, who was supposed to go to, you know, in Justina's place originally, her and her mother helped them and hide them. Here, Daryl looks down at these two. These are the two who were not chosen. Once again, pink and yellow, right? So I do think that these may represent Beth in some way. And it's interesting because we just see Daryl staring down at them and they're looking up at him. And even these candles, there's two, but it just feels a little bit alone coated, with them by candlelight. And he obviously, even in the show, just wants to help them. Um, Sergio tells Fede that two men were helping Carol. This is really interesting, and I have no idea what it means. Okay. He says, release the dogs. So we could call that a serious symbol. And then Sergio says, the hollow man. And he goes, yeah, the dogs. Um, that's very specific. And I can't remember if we've heard anything about the hollow men before in this season. It almost seems like we might have, and I've forgotten what it was. But I can't remember for sure. So if anybody remembers, let me know. But the hollow men is actually a very strong and very obvious uh, literature reference to Heart of Darkness. Well, to the T.S. Eliot poem, I guess. There's a T.S. Eliot poem that's called The Hollow Men, and it's written from the point of view of people like Kurtz, who is in the Heart of Darkness. So I know that sounds really convoluted, but anyone who's big into literature, Heart of Darkness is actually one of my favorite classic novels. Okay, so this is something I'm very familiar with. And basically, the Hollow Men are men who have, or women, they're people who have sold their soul to the devil. So it's like they don't have a soul anymore. Because, and usually it's because they've done things that were very, very, so they've, in Kurtz's case, he was committing war crimes, right? I mean, we're talking genocide. He has sold his soul. And so they're hollow. That's the idea, is that they've sold their soul for whatever worldly thing, and therefore they are hollow. They're the hollow men. They have no souls. And I don't know, maybe this is more a reference to Fede, because Daryl does say at the end that he went bad. He sold his niece to keep, worldly riches from El Alcazar. So maybe that, but we don't actually see these dogs. And this is just like a really weird, really interesting reference to me. And I'm wondering if it will carry over into season 4. Paz goes and finds Elena. So they have a little reunion. And then we find out that Elena has a child. And I actually really loved this part. First of all, how cute is little Pablo? He just melted my heart. So stinking adorable. But the other thing I liked, and I don't think I really got a picture of this, is that Elaine, or I mean that Paz instantly smiles, and she just instantly accepts this. She's not at all upset. I mean, she knows that Elena is married to Guillermo, so this has always been a possibility, even though she didn't probably really think about it. And clearly, Elena didn't tell her about it. But she says, I understand why you had to come back. And it was like Paz immediately just went, okay, I get that he's your son. You clearly love him. That's why you came back for him. So now I'm good with that. You're both coming with me. So it was like she immediately accepted this as part of the family. And, this is just what we're going to do. And I think that's very much a foreshadow of exactly how Daryl will act. So some of you might be wondering, does this mean that Beth's going to show up with children of her own, like biological children? Possibly. That is a possibility. But we've always said that she will be taking care of children in some way. I tend to think it's going to be more like the French girl, who had the Peter Pan school and had all those kids that she took in. Personally, I think that's what it's going to be with Beth. But I think Elena having a child here is a nod to that. It's how they're paralleling that. But just in this story, it is Elena's biological child with Guillermo. So like I said, I just think that that's exactly what we're going to see from Daryl. He's going to be like, "Yep, your kids are my kids. Come on, we'll take them all and let's go." And that's pretty much what happens here, right, with Paz and Elena. But of course, it can't be that simple. Guillermo shows up and knocks Paz over the head, and we see more of this flashback. So it's interesting because it's been kind of revealed a little bit at a time what actually happened. And all we really knew up to this point was that Paz was looking for Elena and never found her, and that she gave up. But what we're actually seeing here is that Guillermo, the guy that took Elena, actually hurt her, not her, hurt Paz, and left her for dead. And it looks like he stabs her here. So she was hurt pretty bad. And then she says, they left me in the road and I gave up hope. Again, this really does suggest some of what happened during the missing 17 days. Now, obviously, it's not a matter of someone, hurting Daryl and taking Beth, and he just decided not to go after her. I mean, clearly that's not the case. It's a little bit different, but it does suggest that the person who took Beth, whatever organization that was, did something that was harmful to team family. You know what I mean? Like there's a parallel here. And it's really interesting because I wouldn't have thought that Guillermo and Paz had ever crossed paths before, really. I mean, other than maybe at the original Ofrenda um, where Elena was taken, possibly, but it's just like this is a lot more personal than what we were led to believe at the beginning. So I think that this is just more of a hint of what happened during those missing 17 days. And, trying to say there was stuff that went down that we haven't seen, um, in which whoever came to take Beth, it was just they orchestrated the whole thing. And maybe that's the easiest way to say it, right? So it's like, maybe Daryl and Team Family believe that Beth got out of the car on her own and staggered away, but I don't think that's what happened at all. I think someone came and took her out and took her somewhere. Um, and so again, it's just more of a hint that it was not random. There was nothing about what happened that was random. It was all orchestrated by somebody. And I don't even think that Daryl is totally aware of that right now. So there's going to be quite a story to tell when they come back together and when we finally get the events of those missing 17 days. And I, for one, can't wait to find out what they are. Um, and so then we finally get here that clearly Guillermo was going to turn homicidal toward Elena at some point. You want my wife? Now you'll be together every night because I will mount her head. It goes on, but Elena stabs him. And Paz says, okay, let's let it go. You're okay. And we got to go. And she does say, I remember you too. And then this was also an interesting detail to me. This is the king who has already turned into a walker, and he kind of staggers up to Daryl, and Daryl kills him, puts him down. But it's interesting to me that they made a point of showing this and that it lasts for a long time. Like Daryl stabs him up under the chin with the knife and like holds it there for several seconds before, pulling it out, and the guy falls down, and we get a close up of this guy's face. I guess I didn't get it, but close up of Daryl's face, and it's like they really wanted us to see him kill that guy. Again, probably a foreshadow of something, um, but just something that was really emphasized. All right, so Justina gets to this guy's. We never even learned this guy's name, I don't think, but I assume these are his rooms, his apartments. And then she takes out the knife. You need to help me. I need a vehicle. And then, of course, it all goes downhill from there. Pretty soon he's on top of her, kind of trying to strangle her. And he says, you manipulated me. What were you expecting? So, clearly not someone who would have been very good to her, but Daryl comes in and saves the day. This is what we like to see. And it was very sweet, right? Then they go break through the door and get these other girls that were not chosen. And I don't think I got a picture of this. Again, it was probably happening too fast. But the one who was not one of the choices, who was one of the workers and had the scar on her face, also came. So they went. So I mean, they were specifically after these two, but she shows up. This is probably her in the background. You just can't see her because she's in shadow, and came with them. So I liked all of that. But I mean, again, I feel like almost collectively these three represent Beth, and so they made them part of the story. And yeah, Justina does too, but they're adding in these little clues that there's more going on, right? Then we see Carol and Antonio. He brings her tea. Again, this was kind of just a sweet scene. I won't go into the tea too much, but me and my fellow theorists have talked about teapots being a symbol. We've seen them a lot in the background in significant scenes. And it's not the kind of thing I usually catch very well. I'm not as good at looking at colors and shapes and things in the background, but my fellow theorists are, and so they've picked them up several times. So I think the tea symbol, um, I mean, I think they're using it symbolically here. Let's just put it that way. But it's relatively short-lived because Fede's men come and demand to be let in so that they can search the house. And so once again, Alba helps them. They take them underneath the city because it's not safe on the street. And then this guy just says, good luck, keep going. And when they get to the outside, they get surrounded by walkers. They kill most of them, and then Gustavo shows up. And unfortunately, Gustavo is going to end up betraying them, but we'll get to that in a minute. Once again, they go into this room. I could not, for the life of me, get decent screenshots because too much action. But there's running, there's screaming, there's fighting, there's walkers. It's a typical uh, Walking Dead fight scene, right? But they all get out okay. And then Paz says that she's going to take all of these women back to the camp. It's going to be safest for them there in Barcelona. And that this kid, he's so cute. I have a nephew who would totally be doing this, making the sounds and pretending to drive. So I think that's why he just cracked me up. I'm like, yes, I know this child. He's the one I know is not Spanish, but it's pretty much the same child. Anyway, and he says, "What about you? There's nothing for me in Solas, so she'll stay there with Elena." And of course, she has other friends there from before that she knows. Good luck getting back home. There's a lot of luck floating around in this episode, right? And this was cute. I couldn't have done it without you. And she goes, "Really? No, I probably couldn't have." Um, anyway, so then he takes Justina and says that she's gonna come with them on the boat. And I actually really like this part while they were writing because I just feel like this is very Beth coded. Um, she symbolically represents Beth here, right? And so we have him or her like really holding on to him and hugging him. Um, I don't know. I still haven't completely nailed down the bull symbol, but I have talked about this before, right? And I would say that it's just a symbol of Spain. It really could be that because obviously the matador is, but we had matador symbols back in season 7. And so it's one that I want to look into a little bit more. Um, anyway, we see them riding past. This is a famous landmark, I believe. All right, so now we get to this. I will say that, I mean, on the one hand, I think we were right about a lot of the things we said, at least for this season. Who knows what's going to happen in the next season and all of that. But, nobody died. Carol didn't die. Antonio was planning to go with them, so she wasn't going to stay with him in Europe. Um, I said that I didn't think we would get any more of the flashback. We got a tad more here, not much. But actually, now with what we got here, I think there's more. Kind of changed my mind on that. And I do think this flashback is going to continue into the next season. So we have a little bit more of him thinking about this here. And you guys, I actually have something else to tell you, but I'm not going to do it in this video about some articles that came out in the last few days, and they were just weird, weirdo marketing. And one of them had to do with Merle. And for a minute, I thought they were saying that maybe Rooker was going to make an appearance, which I would be all for, Rooker making an appearance. But it wasn't. They were just saying that they have Merle in the flashback, and that's really all they were talking about. So anyway, I'll get into more of that later. But anyway, we see this again of Merle saying, "Go run." And then he says, "Things are different now, little brother. People do what they got to do." And I think at one point he said, "You got to grow up." So those were some lines that we haven't had before, or at least not all of them. And that makes me think, I mean, what does he mean that things are different now as opposed to before? People do what they got to do. I mean, in general, that could mean anything, especially in the world of The Walking Dead. But I think he's talking about something specific there. So, and I've thought this a few times and never really come to much of a conclusion about it throughout the season, is that in the episode Home, which was 310, um, it's where Daryl and Merle left the prison together, for a whole episode before they came back. And what we learned there is that at some point Merle left home. Um, and he said that after that, he didn't realize that the father had turned on Daryl. It's where he sees all the scars on his back. And Daryl gets after him a little bit and says, well, kind of basically says, "Well, what did you think was going to happen if you weren't there? I was going to get beaten. But Merle, at some point he had to get out on his own. And it's like, I have a hard time judging Merle for that. You could always say he left Daryl to take the beatings, and maybe he did, but I mean, when you come from an abusive household like that, at some point you've just got to get out of there. And I think that's what Merle did. But he also seems to have gone back for Daryl at some point. Because at the beginning of the series, they're roaming around together. So there's a story there that we don't have the details of. I mean, we have the basics, I think. And so I'm wondering if this particular flashback is like a lead up to that. If like he's telling Daryl to go, um, because he's gonna go and he doesn't want the brunt of their father's anger to fall on Daryl. And I'm thinking that Daryl goes back, right? So anyway, I don't know. This is just me conjecturing, but I'm thinking that because we got these extra lines, that there's a little bit more here, and that these flashbacks will continue into the next season because they're not much right now. They're not giving us much of a story. We're getting Daryl running away and Merle telling him to go, and it's clear that both of them have been beat up. That's the beginning of a story. That's not like the beginning, middle, and end of a story, right? Um, I even wonder, and I actually think this would be really cool if they did this. The other story that we have about Daryl in his childhood is the one he told Andrea about how he got lost in the woods and was gone for however many days and then came back and no one looked for him, right? And so he just walked back into the house and made himself a sandwich. And maybe this is that too. Maybe he runs off into the woods for a while and of course his dad isn't going to come looking for him and eventually he's hungry and he goes back and yeah, anyway, I'm just saying it would be an interesting way to tie all of the stories that we do have about Daryl together. And I think that would be cool if they did something like that. But I have no idea if that's what they're going for. But I do think that we're going to get more of this in season 4. I don't think this is the end of what they're trying to show us here. So then Justina talks to him. Um, so actually, even this, when she says, "Are you okay?" and he says, "Yeah, I'm okay." This is actually a parallel to his and Beth's dialogue. I think they said "all right" in 401. Are you all right? But and she's saying okay, but still pretty much the same thing, potato, potato. And she says what her uncle did, she couldn't even imagine that. She couldn't imagine doing it. And he says, "Well, world's messed up. You either go good or go bad." He went bad. And she says, "But not you. You went good. But why? Why do you do all this and take so much risk just for us?" And he says, "The world's messed up. I felt like something got lost, you know, chance to really have something. It ain't going to happen to me. But for you and Roberto, I wanted you to have that chance." Okay, let's read that again, shall we? The world's messed up. This feels like he could be talking about what happened in season 5, right? It felt like something got lost. Again, he's talking about something being lost, not something being dead. Just the wording that they're using here, which suggests that Beth is lost, right? And that was he feels like that was his chance to really have something. And then he says, "It ain't gonna happen to me, but I wanted you guys to have the chance for it." So this is really interesting because he's been so obviously and almost in a very forward way, assertive way, looking for a romantic partner. And it's like now he's decided that it's not ever going to happen for him, which is sad. But it almost feels like a turning point a little bit. Like now that it's like what they always say, like stop looking for love and then it will find you. You know, it's almost like a play on that theme a little bit. Um, so it's like the more he sees these other stories, he's the more convinced he is that that's not going to happen for him. Um, but anyway, again, he wants her and Roberto to have the chance to be together. So this is a really interesting conversation and a really interesting way to end the season. Um, and the next question is, has he let go of his dead? I don't think he has yet. I think, I mean, we've still got the Merle flashback. I don't think he's let go of Merle completely. And I don't think he's at all let go of Beth. You know, we haven't seen anything that clearly suggests that, right? And I mean, we could even take this back to the whole idea of his grandfather's grave in France. Remember that the way that some of us interpreted that and the way that Norman had described it were different. And um, the fact that his grandfather died in a foreign place, I don't think he's let go of that. Even that, it's like generational trauma. And even that he hasn't let go of. Anyway, so they head back, and this is funny too. Kids probably singing a Springsteen song, wondering where we are. They set that up early with Roberto loving Springsteen and telling Daryl about it. So I thought that was a fun way to kind of come full circle. And of course, there's the musical reference. So then we see more of them on the bike, and I like this part. Justina's like letting her arms go. It's like she's feeling very free. It's almost got a Titanic vibe about it. But again, this just felt so Beth coded. Like it's like such a relief at this point because she's been through so much, and thought she was going to have to go through this horrible thing where she was going to have to marry someone that was going to be abusive to her, and now she's free and she gets to go be with the person she wants to be with. So it's a very nice ending for Justina and Roberto. They get back. Unfortunately, when they get to the lighthouse, some of Fede's men are there, but between Daryl and Valentina, they figure it out. But she's been shot, so we kind of missed. They skipped over, um, which could be actually now that I'm thinking about it, could be a parallel in itself because um, think of it this way: they get back to the lighthouse and Roberto's gone, and we didn't see any of that, right? They skipped over it, kind of like they skipped over when Beth went missing during those 17 days. Anyway, she tells him what happened. Roberto made her hide, but they took him back to Solas. And then she says Carol went to save Antonio. Rodo and Daniel went with her, but something must have gone wrong because they didn't come back. So Daryl's like, okay, back to it. And then Gustavo, they really don't make Gustavo a villain. Number one, obviously his wife is sick and he needs medicine. And so there's that. But I also think it has to do with, I didn't mention it earlier, but when Sergio talks to him about how two men were helping Carol, he says, they came from the lighthouse in a truck, and Fede goes, okay, so somebody let them in here. And it was Gustavo, but he didn't have any idea what they were doing. So I also think it might be that Fede was maybe blackmailing him a little bit because he let them in and he was mad at him. So his hand was kind of forced. Still, I was like, Gustavo, why? But at the end, too, no one seems to be very mad at him. So I think the idea is that he was kind of forced into it. But unfortunately, he does turn them in. But then, to their surprise, Fede says, you're free to leave, but I doubt you will. And he's got this whole public execution by Walker thing set up because they got Roberto and chained him to two walkers, which are Rodo and Daniel, which is sad. Those are Valentina's guys. They both got killed. So a public execution, and then we kind of have this whole playing keep away from walkers sort of thing. And Alba throws a knife out because they don't have any weapons, but they shoot the knife so Carol can't actually get it right away. But then Daryl shows up. And so does Justina. Now, this part actually felt very, very Beth coded to me. Go back and watch it again if you can. When she shows up, they have this like very soft choir music going on in the background. So it's like kind of, oh, you know what I mean? It's almost like this like heavenly thing of her. And they even, did I get a picture of this? I might not have. See, this is actually the first time we see Justina, so you can't even see her very well. She kind of blends in, but he sees her, Roberto does, and starts this part. She says, hey, he's a liar, and it shows Daryl freeze. And this is interesting because it's like he hears her voice and he knows it's her. But again, that feels very Beth coded. We've always said he might hear her before he sees her. And so just the fact that they do the music and she shows up and she's been such a heavy proxy for Beth this whole time. And then Daryl hears her and just freezes. It's really interesting the way that they show it. But she says he lied to everyone. And then Grandma starts yelling at Fede, do something, save her. And so he does. He gets the gun, and between him and Daryl and his men, they shoot all the walkers. But of course, they start shooting at Daryl too. Fede doesn't like him. And then he finally admits to his mother that he did send her away, and she smacks him. But we have the reunion between Roberto and Justina. Lots of romantic couples hugging, which is great. And Daryl, once again, just watching them. But Antonio says, you're not going to be safe here. Daryl says, you'll be fine. Okay, this really jumped out at me. Daryl burnt it down. That is no doubt about it. No way around it. That is Beth dialogue. We should burn it down. And really, when you think about it, it does follow the theme. Beth was talking about burning down their past and the things specifically that don't serve them anymore so that they can move forward with hope and with positivity, right? So it's like there's nothing wrong with acknowledging your past and with, dealing with your feelings. But at some point, you can't let them drag you down either. You got to let them go and move forward. And this is like what Daryl and Justina did is kind of a literal representation of that. They burnt down this organization that was harmful. And it's not there anymore. And she says at this point, he burnt it down. There's no more Ofrenda anymore. So it very much goes with the theme. But again, we're getting some Beth dialogue here. It's in ashes. The Ofrenda is over. A lot of them want to execute Fede, but Justina says if we can't show mercy, then we are no better than him. So instead, they take him to the dungeon. And really, I think the biggest reason for this is because he's going to be in next season. It actually reminds me of Negan a little bit in All Out War. I've said this before, I was not happy that they let Negan live. I really wanted them to kill him off. I'm not sad about that so much now because I like where they've gone with his character, but at the time I was. And realistically, I don't think in that situation there is any way that they would have let him live after everything he did. And yeah, they came up with, Rick was trying to honor Carl, and I get all of that. But I mean, realistically, I don't think that that would have really been the case. And it's probably true here too. If everybody really understood and believed what Fede had done, I think they would have wanted to execute him. But overall, I think he needs to be in next season. So the writers are coming up with a reason to let him live a little bit longer. And he's yelling at Daryl as he goes, "This is your fault. You're a monster." It's like, yeah, whatever, dude. So anyway, then they go to the boat. Um, Antonio and Daryl talk. I'm not sure this is how you pictured going home. And Daryl says it's just what happened, um, which maybe we could link back to what happened and what's going on. You know anything about sailing? Just what I've seen in movies. And then we have this scene. This is the one that was leaked. You could watch it on YouTube a few days ago. She says hot dogs. So I didn't get all of it, but she says last night in Spain, do you wanna? She means like eat the hot dogs. I'm not sure if they actually do. Like we don't see them open the can. I mean, he said yes, so it kind of seems like they did, but we didn't actually see it, so I'm not sure. But this is where he talks to her about stuff. He says, "You want to hear something stupid? This whole time I've been trying to get home. Why did I leave in the first place? Why did I have to get in a fight with that guy in Maine and get thrown on the boat? Why didn't I leave France when I could have? This makes no sense." He says, "My whole life I've been running, just running and fighting." And she says, "You've had to just to survive." And he says, "Yeah, but it's like a bad habit now, though. Every time I get somewhere, I just feel like I gotta go. It doesn't matter where. I just hear that voice and I gotta go." And he says, "And I'm afraid when we get home, I'm gonna hear that voice again." So this is what I was talking about. Like, I feel like they released this so that we would understand a little bit more about the flashback and what he's dealing with. Um, and I think he's recognizing in a lot of ways that, because I do feel like this is tied to him thinking that it's never going to happen for him. So he's almost recognizing that because let's see, what did he say to Justina? That it was, what was lost was the chance to really have something. And he means like a romantic relationship or a family of your own. And because I think he's kind of recognizing because he never had that, that's why he runs. I think he's correlating those two things because I don't think it's a coincidence that he's finally come to this realization about how he always feels compelled to run. And at the same time, he's telling Justina, this is never going to happen for me. So there's a correlation between those two things. And that's why he's afraid that when he gets home, he'll just want to run again. It's almost like he's just always searching for that thing. And again, I'm going to point out, which I did once before, that the only time we saw him not want to run and actually be the one to propose they stay put was with Beth. That was the only time ever in all of the seasons of the show with Daryl that he did not run. And that's really important. So Carol says, maybe you won't feel it this time. And you can tell he doesn't believe her. He's going, uh-huh. And then he finally kind of concedes, though, and says, well, okay, so first she says maybe it's safe to finally go home and stay. And it's actually sad because Carol cries right here. It's like she is very much sympathizing with him. And she's probably recognizing that he's opening up to her. This is a good way to bookend the season because in the first episode, they talked about how he hides things and he doesn't talk to her, and now he's talking to her. So it's a really good way to bring that back around too. And he kind of concedes and says, "Yeah, maybe I won't," but you can tell he doesn't really believe it. And then they hug. And then Grandma brings him food, and he just kind of manipulates her. She does say, "You brought this on yourself," and he says, "Well, you already lost one son. You don't have to lose another." And unfortunately, she decides to let him out. So then we see Carol sleeping, but she looks over and notices that Daryl's not asleep. He's out looking at the ocean. And then Fede shows up, of course. "Do you really think you can just sail home now?" It's funny how it's all of America's fault because Daryl pissed him off. It's just funny. "You're going to die here and roam around La Costa Morta." And so the first episode was also called La Costa Morta. So again, they're doing a really good. This is why I say I actually really enjoyed it because they're doing a really good job with storytelling and bringing things back around to kind of tie everything up here at the end. He says, so you're going to roam around the coast until the flesh rots off those bones. See you never, son of a bitch. And then, of course, Carol shows up and pushes him. And when he fires, it starts the boat on fire. So this is probably one thing that that reviewer said is that there's going to be something at the end that's going to make everyone roll their eyes. I think it's that the boat started on fire because it's like a little too convenient that they still can't go home, right? But I mean, I don't mind that because yeah, is it a plot device? Of course. But there's another season. We know that. So, of course, they have to have some reason that they can't go home yet. They have to do it that way, you know? So I'm sure that that's what the eye roll was meant to be about. Um, but the others come to help. Antonio finally knocks out Fede, but the boat's on fire. They try to put it out, but they really can't. It explodes. And then we have the second Codron sighting. He sees the fire on the beach, and I don't know if he's going to go toward it. I really hope that like the first episode of season 4, him and Daryl like and Carol come back together, just because I want to see them interact some more. But I mean, you could also tie this back symbolically to Morgan finding Daryl because we didn't see it from his point of view in season 5, Morgan finding Daryl. But remember, Daryl and Aaron were caught in the wolf trap. And so at some point, obviously, Morgan saw them and came down to help, right? And then he, uh, Daryl led Morgan back to Rick. So again, I'm feeling like something like that might happen with Codron. It might be a lot more protracted, but he's seeing something from afar. I'm assuming that they're going to cross paths somewhere in season 4 because otherwise, why would they have Codron here? They're obviously hinting he's going to be in it again. And yeah, maybe he's going to be the person that some way, somehow leads Daryl to death. I'm kind of hoping that. Like, I think that would be great. And the fact that he's the serious character, it just makes a lot of sense if they've set it up that way. But of course, we will, as always, have to wait and see. W.D. Wade did point out that when the boat is burning, we have a cross here, and it's like a burning cross, which actually reminds me a little bit of Carl's death. In that case, it wasn't a burning cross, it was a burning phoenix, but similar, right? And unfortunately, they're all feeling frustrated because now they can't leave on the boat. And it probably does mean that, it was just safer for all of them to get away after everything that's happened. Not only because of Fede, I mean, obviously he's still alive. I don't know, we'll see what happens with him. They just knocked him out here. But also, there could be people from El Alcazar who want revenge and are going to come after them. So it would have just been a lot better for them to get on the boat and sail away. And so they didn't have to worry about that. But now, guess what? They can't go anywhere. So they're going to have to worry about that. And then, interestingly, this is the last shot of the season. I will say, when we used to watch the trailers from the flagship show, we always said that most of the stuff that was in the trailer were from the first 3 to 5 episodes. And that's because when they put the trailers together, they were still filming the season, right? The seasons were longer back then. They were 16 episodes. And so by the time they needed the trailer for Comic-Con, they didn't have the whole season filmed. But in this case, we got to remember this. They actually do. There was a lot of stuff in the trailer that was from this last episode. And this was the shot that they ended the trailer with. And that was actually the last shot of the entire season. So I thought that was interesting. But obviously, everybody's frustrated because the boat's burning. The other interesting thing about this episode, at least I'm watching it on AMC Plus, they didn't have an episode insider for the end of this. They do have like a 45-minute behind the scenes of the whole season special. And I'm not sure if that's like all of the episode insiders combined or if it's a whole different documentary. I'll probably watch it at some point, but I haven't yet today. So yeah, so we didn't have anything from the episode insider to talk about. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I have. I did really enjoy the episode, despite there not being any Beth. But you guys, I know people are going to ask me this, what if she doesn't show up? What do you think? You guys, we got to wait for season 4. They've said it's a 2-season arc for season 3 and 4. There's so much promise right now between, just Daryl finding his happy ending, which has been the theme since the beginning of the spinoff, to co-drawn to all of the Beth parallels with Sandra, with the girls with the pink and the yellow dresses, with him finding Justine. You know what I mean? All of it points to me more than ever toward him finding Beth. And yeah, we haven't seen it yet. I get it, but I'm not at all giving up hope. Not at all. Yeah, it's a little frustrating. We have to wait for another season, but I mean, we're all still going to be around when the next season rolls around, right? So, I mean, what are we actually going to do except wait for it to happen? So, anyway, let me know what you thought about the finale and let me know what questions you have. And the good thing is that I've not been able to do any extras, like the Operation Lead the Walker Away thing, or, go back and look at the chess reference or anything like that. Now that the season is over, I can do some more extra things like that. So if there's anything you want me to deep dive into, let me know and I'll get to it. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed it. I did really enjoy it. And I'm sure we've got lots more we can talk about moving forward. So anyway, I will talk to you guys again soon, and I hope you have fun watching the episode.